On a late Friday afternoon in Providence Municipal Court, something extraordinary happened, something that would challenge everything one man believed about power, respect, and what it truly means to be successful. This is the story of Danny Morrison, a self-made millionaire who
Oh,
thought his
lovely.
wealth
How many
placed him
children do you
above the
have?
rules that govern ordinary people. It's also the story of Judge Frank Caprio, a 77-year-old immigrant son who has spent over 4 decades proving that in the halls of justice, every person stands on equal ground. What unfolded that day would become legendary among those who witnessed it, a masterclass in humility, redemption, and the transformative power of true justice. 3:30 p.m., Providence Municipal Court. The week was winding down. Judge Frank Caprio reviewed his final case of the day. Danny Morrison, age 47, charged with reckless driving and failure to appear at his originally scheduled court date. For Judge Caprio, this was routine. In nearly 5 decades on the bench, he'd presided over thousands of cases, developing an almost preternatural ability to read people. He could distinguish genuine remorse from manipulation, understand when someone needed compassion versus accountability, and recognize when a defendant simply didn't grasp the gravity of their situation. The bailiff called Morrison's name. Through the courtroom doors strode a man who embodied success by conventional measures: designer suit, Italian leather shoes, a gold Rolex that caught the courtroom lights. Danny Morrison had built an automotive empire from nothing, 3 thriving dealerships across Providence, employing 47 people, generating millions in annual revenue. He was a self-made man who'd started selling used cars from a gravel lot 2 decades earlier. Through aggressive business tactics and an unwavering belief that money solved most problems, he'd built something impressive. His BMW sat outside in a no-parking zone. He'd be quick, he figured. In the gallery, about a dozen people waited for their own cases. An elderly woman clutching her purse, 2 young men in work clothes whispering about parking tickets, a court stenographer who'd seen this type before. Officer Martinez, who'd written Morrison's original citation, sat in the back row, curious how this would unfold. Morrison approached the bench with casual swagger, the bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way through checkbook diplomacy and intimidation. No respectful posture, no preliminary "Your Honor," just a man who clearly believed this was beneath him. "Yeah, I'm here about the driving thing," Morrison announced, not bothering to stand straight. "Look, Judge, I'm a busy man. I employ 47 people, pay more taxes than most folks earn in a year. Can we just settle this with a fine so I can get back to running my businesses?" Judge Caprio looked up from the paperwork, his expression neutral, his eyes noting every detail of Morrison's demeanor. In nearly 5 decades of judicial service, he'd developed particular distaste for arrogance masquerading as importance. "Mr. Morrison," the judge began, his voice measured, "you failed to appear for your original court date. Today, we're addressing both the reckless driving charge and your failure to respect this court's schedule. Do you understand the seriousness of these matters?" Morrison shifted his weight impatiently. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I had a business emergency. Things came up. I'm here now." Judge Caprio's voice remained calm, but those familiar with him recognized the warning signs: a slight straightening of posture, more deliberate word choices. "Mr. Morrison, this court operates on respect. Respect for the law, respect for the process, and respect for everyone who appears before it. Your attitude suggests you believe your business dealings excuse you from the same responsibilities that apply to every other citizen." What happened next shocked everyone present. Danny Morrison laughed, actually laughed in open court. "Come on, Judge. You know how the world works. People like me keep this economy running. We create jobs, pay taxes. A little flexibility goes a long way." The courtroom fell silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Judge Caprio removed his glasses slowly, a gesture veteran court watchers knew meant something significant was coming. "Mr. Morrison," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of judicial authority, "you seem to believe that your financial success exempts you from showing basic respect in my courtroom." Morrison's response stunned everyone. He threw his hands up in exaggerated exasperation. "Respect? Look, I've been keeping this city's economy going for 15 years. Half the cops who write tickets probably bought their cars from my lots. You want to lecture me about respect when I'm the one keeping this place afloat?" Whispers erupted throughout the gallery. Court officers exchanged glances. The elderly woman gasped audibly. Officer Martinez shook his head in disbelief. Judge Caprio's bailiff stepped forward, sensing escalation. The judge stood slowly, his 77-year-old frame carrying the full dignity of his office. The courtroom went silent. Even the whispers stopped. "Sir," Judge Caprio said, his voice dropping to a level that somehow commanded more attention than any shout, "your wealth does not grant you immunity from courtesy. Your tax contributions do not purchase special treatment in my courtroom. And your employment of 47 people does not excuse your fundamental failure to understand that here we are all equal under the law." Morrison's face flushed red. Years of having employees defer to him, of having his money smooth over problems, had left him completely unprepared for someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. "Equal under the law?" His voice rose. "That's rich, coming from a system that lets real criminals walk while harassing successful businessmen over simple traffic violations. I don't have time for philosophical lectures from someone who's never had to meet a payroll." The insult hung in the air like something physical. Judge Caprio, who'd immigrated to America as a child, worked construction to pay for law school, and dedicated his entire life to public service, absorbed the blow with visible restraint. "Mr. Morrison, I'm going to give you one opportunity to reconsider your approach and show this court the respect it deserves." Morrison checked his watch, made an exaggerated sighing sound, and delivered the line that would haunt him. "You know what? I'm done with this. I've got real problems to deal with." The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Morrison strode toward the exit. Judge Caprio's voice followed him, calm but carrying absolute authority. "Mr. Morrison, if you leave this courtroom without being dismissed, you will be in contempt of court." Morrison didn't even turn around. He waved dismissively over his shoulder. "Add it to my tab, Your Honor." The emphasis on "Your Honor" was mocking, dripping with disrespect. Morrison pushed through the courtroom doors and disappeared into the hallway, leaving behind a courtroom full of people who'd just witnessed something unprecedented in Judge Caprio's decades on the bench. The judge stood motionless for a long moment, processing what had occurred. In 45 years of judicial service, he'd seen arrogance, disrespect, and entitlement, but never such blatant contempt combined with such fundamental misunderstanding of what justice means. "Court will be in recess," Judge Caprio announced quietly. "Mr. Morrison's case will be rescheduled, and additional charges will be filed." 30 minutes later, Danny Morrison sat in his BMW outside the courthouse, making phone calls about a car auction, having already dismissed the courtroom experience as a waste of time. His phone rang. Robert Chen, his attorney of 8 years. "Danny, please tell me you didn't actually walk out on Judge Frank Caprio." Morrison barely looked up from his auction catalog. "Bob, relax. It was just some old judge on a power trip. I've got bigger problems than a traffic ticket." The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. When Robert spoke again, his voice carried urgency Morrison had never heard before. "Danny, you need to listen very carefully. Judge Frank Caprio isn't just some old judge. He's one of the most respected jurists in New England. What you just did, Danny, you could be facing serious jail time." "Jail time for a traffic ticket? Come on, Bob, you're being dramatic." "Danny, you're not listening." You walked out of a courtroom during active proceedings. That's criminal contempt of court. But that's not even the worst part. Judge Caprio has discretion over your sentencing, and you just showed him the utmost disrespect. Morrison finally stopped reading his catalog. What are you saying? I'm saying instead of a fine in traffic school, you could be looking at 6 months in jail, loss of your driver's license, and criminal charges that could affect your business licenses. Danny, you might have just destroyed everything you've spent 15 years building. The words hit like cold water. That can't be right. It was just a traffic case. It stopped being just a traffic case the moment you walked out. And Danny, there's something else you need to know about Judge Caprio. Robert's voice grew heavy with what he was about to reveal. Judge Frank Caprio is famous for his compassion. He's known for helping people, understanding their circumstances, giving second chances. Danny, he probably would have reduced your fine and sent you to traffic school. Instead, you insulted a man who has dedicated his entire life to serving his community. Morrison's stomach twisted. What do you mean? We're going back to that courthouse today. You're going to apologize. Genuinely apologize. And hope that Judge Caprio's legendary compassion extends to people who have insulted everything he stands for. An hour later, Robert Chen paced outside the courthouse. When Morrison's BMW pulled up, this time in a legal parking space, Robert noticed his client looked different, smaller somehow, less confident. Are you ready for this? Robert asked. Morrison nodded, but his usual swagger had vanished completely. Bob, what if he won't listen? Then you'll face the consequences of your actions. But Danny, Judge Caprio is known for giving people chances to make things right. The question is whether you're genuinely ready to make things right. At 4:45 p.m., Judge Frank Caprio sat in his chambers reviewing Morrison's case file, preparing contempt charges. His secretary knocked. Judge, Robert Chen is here with his client, Mr. Morrison. They're requesting to address the court. Judge Caprio looked up, genuinely surprised. In his experience, people who stormed out of his courtroom didn't typically return the same day, seeking reconciliation. Tell Mr. Chen I'll see them in 5 minutes. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was completely different. Danny Morrison entered behind his attorney, and his transformation was immediately visible. Gone was the expensive suit, replaced by simple slacks and a dress shirt. His posture was different, respectful, uncertain, humbled. Judge Caprio took his seat, expression unreadable. Mr. Morrison, the judge began, voice measured. This is highly unusual. You left my courtroom without permission, showing contempt for this court and the judicial process. Why have you returned? Morrison stood, and for the first time, his voice shook slightly. Your Honor, I came back because I realized I made a terrible mistake. Not just walking out, though that was inexcusable, but in how I conducted myself in your courtroom. Judge Caprio listened without interruption. His decades of experience reading people now focused entirely on determining whether this apology was genuine or calculated. Your Honor, my attorney explained to me who you are, what you've accomplished, how you've served this community. I came into your courtroom thinking I was more important than the process, more important than showing respect. I was wrong. Morrison paused, visibly struggling with words that didn't come naturally to someone accustomed to always being right. I insulted you personally, and I insulted everything this courtroom represents. I have no excuse for my behavior. I can only tell you that I'm ashamed of how I acted, and I'm here to accept whatever consequences you deem appropriate. Judge Caprio studied Morrison for a long moment. Mr. Morrison, when you left here 2 hours ago, you demonstrated contempt, not just for me personally, but for the rule of law itself. You suggested that your wealth and business success entitled you to different treatment under the law. Morrison nodded, face flushed with embarrassment. Yes, Your Honor. And I was completely wrong. You mocked the concept of equality under the law. You dismissed the importance of respect in a courtroom. You insulted my life's work and everything I believe in. Each word hit Morrison like a physical blow. He was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistakes. Yes, Your Honor, I understand that now. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly. Mr. Morrison, tell me what changed in the last 2 hours. What brought you back here? Morrison took a deep breath, his voice carrying genuine emotion for the first time. Your Honor, my attorney told me about your background, how you came to this country as an immigrant, worked construction to pay for law school, how you've dedicated your life to serving others. And I realized that I've spent so much time building my business that I forgot basic human decency. He paused, gathering courage for what came next. When I walked out of here, I thought I was important because I have money, because I employ people. But you've spent 40 years serving your community, treating everyone with dignity regardless of their bank account. I've been successful in business, but I failed as a human being today. Judge Caprio's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. This was the breakthrough he'd been listening for, the moment when ego gives way to genuine understanding. Your Honor, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm hoping you'll give me a chance to prove that I can be better than the man who walked out of here 2 hours ago. Judge Frank Caprio removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. A ritual those who knew him recognized as his way of processing something significant. The courtroom was completely silent, everyone understanding they were witnessing something rare and important. Mr. Morrison, he began, his voice carrying the weight of 4 decades of judicial wisdom. You've given me something to think about this afternoon. Morrison remained standing, uncertain whether to hope or prepare for the worst. When you left here 2 hours ago, I was prepared to throw the book at you. Criminal contempt, maximum fines, jail time. Your disrespect was unlike anything I've experienced in my career. Morrison swallowed hard, accepting that his fate was entirely in this man's hands. But you came back, Mr. Morrison. That tells me something important. It tells me that somewhere underneath that arrogance and entitlement, there's a man capable of recognizing his mistakes. Judge Caprio stood, and his presence seemed to fill the entire courtroom. Let me tell you something about respect, Mr. Morrison. I've been on this bench for over 40 years. I've seen wealthy defendants and poor defendants. I've seen people with PhDs and people who can't read. And you know what I've learned? A person's character has nothing to do with their bank account and everything to do with how they treat others. Morrison nodded, hanging on every word. You told me you employ 47 people. That's impressive. But those 47 people work for you because you pay them, not because you respect them. True leadership isn't about being the boss. It's about serving others. Judge Caprio walked around from behind his bench, something he rarely did, bringing himself closer to eye level with Morrison. When I came to this country as a young man, I learned that America's greatness isn't in its wealth. It's in the promise that everyone, regardless of their background, gets equal treatment under the law. You challenged that principle today. Yes, Your Honor, and I was wrong. You were wrong, Mr. Morrison. But you were also teachable. You came back. You listened. You learned. And that gives me hope. Morrison felt tears forming, something that hadn't happened in years. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to do something I've never done before in a case like this. I'm going to give you a choice. Morrison looked up, confused. Choice 1. I sentence you to 6 months in jail, fine you the maximum amount, and you leave here with a criminal record that will follow you for the rest of your life. The words hung heavy in the air. Choice 2. You spend the next 6 months learning what service really means. Every Saturday for 6 months, you'll volunteer at the Providence Community Kitchen, serving meals to people who can't afford them. You'll work alongside people who have nothing but give everything they have to help others. Morrison's eyes widened. This wasn't what he'd expected. But that's not all, Mr. Morrison. You'll also spend 4 hours every month in community court, watching how real justice works. You'll see me sentence people who show respect despite having nothing, and you'll understand the difference between true dignity and purchased privilege. Judge Caprio returned to his bench, but his voice remained personal, direct. If you choose the community service, you'll report to me personally every month. You'll write a report about what you've learned. And at the end of 6 months, if you've genuinely learned what respect and service mean, I'll reduce your charges to a simple traffic violation. Morrison could barely speak. Your Honor, why would you give me this chance? Judge Caprio's response would become the moment that defined both men's lives. Because, Mr. Morrison, I believe in redemption. I believe that people can change, can grow, can become better than their worst moments. You showed me your worst today. Now I want to see your best. Morrison broke down completely, tears flowing freely for the first time since childhood. Your Honor, I choose the community service. I want to learn. I want to be better. 6 months later, Danny Morrison returned to Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom for his final report. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him sat 12 people, volunteers from the Providence Community Kitchen, community court staff, and people whose lives he'd touched during his service. Morrison approached the bench, but his posture now reflected genuine respect rather than forced compliance. In his hands, he carried a folder thick with reports, letters, and photographs. Your Honor, I'm here to report on my 6 months of community service. Judge Caprio, now 78, settled back in his chair with genuine curiosity. Tell me what you've learned, Mr. Morrison. Morrison opened his folder, but didn't read from it. Instead, he spoke from the heart. Your Honor, 6 months ago, I thought success meant having money and power. I measured my worth by my bank account and my ability to intimidate others. I was wrong about everything. He gestured toward the people who'd come to support him. These people taught me what real success looks like. Maria, sitting in the 3rd row, has been volunteering at the community kitchen for 8 years. She works 2 jobs and still gives her Saturdays to feed people who have nothing. She taught me that generosity isn't about what you can afford to give. It's about giving regardless of what you can afford. Judge Caprio noticed the genuine emotion in Morrison's voice, the way he looked at the volunteers with real respect. Your Honor, I'll never forget my first day at the community kitchen. I showed up in a $300 shirt thinking I was doing charity work. But when I tried to serve soup and spilled it everywhere, a homeless veteran named Frank, yes, Frank like you, Your Honor, patiently showed me how to do it properly. He said, Son, service isn't about looking good. It's about making others feel dignified. Morrison's voice caught as he continued. That man had lost everything, his home, his family, his job, but he still had more grace and dignity than I'd shown in years. I've served over 200 meals in the last 6 months. But more importantly, I've eaten alongside people who have nothing but still share what little they have. I learned that dignity isn't about what you own. It's about how you treat others. He pulled out a letter from his folder. Your Honor, this is from the director of the Providence Community Kitchen. She's offered me a position on their board of directors. Not because of my money, though I'm honored to be their largest donor now, but because of the work I've done alongside their volunteers. Judge Caprio's eyebrows raised slightly. This exceeded his expectations. There's something else, Your Honor. I've restructured my businesses. Every employee now receives profit sharing, full health benefits, and paid time off to volunteer. I've learned that true success means lifting others up, not standing on top of them. Morrison paused, gathering courage for his final statement. Your Honor, 6 months ago, I was successful but empty. I had money but no purpose. You could have destroyed my life with a single sentence. Instead, you saved it by teaching me what service really means." Judge Frank Caprio stood, his voice filled with genuine pride. "Mr. Morrison, in 45 years on this bench, I've seen many people pass through these doors. Some leave unchanged, some leave bitter, and some leave transformed. You, sir, represent the best of what our justice system can accomplish." The courtroom erupted in applause from the volunteers who'd come to support Morrison. "Your charges are hereby reduced to a simple traffic violation, fine suspended. But more importantly, you've learned what I hoped you would learn, that true leadership is service, that real dignity comes from lifting others up, and that respect is earned through our actions, not our bank accounts." Judge Caprio extended his hand to Morrison. "Welcome to the brotherhood of people who understand that success is measured not by what we accumulate, but by what we contribute." Morrison accepted the handshake, but this time both men stood as equals, two people who understood that justice is ultimately about helping others become the best versions of themselves. Danny Morrison's story didn't end in that courtroom. It rippled outward, touching countless lives. His 3 dealerships became models of employee-centered business practices. The Providence Community Kitchen saw donations triple, not just from Morrison, but from other business leaders inspired by his transformation. Judge Caprio continued his work, using Morrison's case as a teaching moment about the true purpose of the justice system, not merely to punish but to transform. And Morrison himself, he never forgot the lesson learned in that courtroom. Every Saturday morning, you can still find him at the community kitchen, serving meals alongside people from all walks of life, understanding that true wealth is measured in lives touched, not dollars accumulated. This is what justice looks like when it's done right, not as a hammer to destroy, but as a teacher to transform, not as a weapon of retribution, but as a tool of redemption. Because in the end, the measure of our character isn't found in our bank accounts or our accomplishments. It's found in how we treat others, especially when we think no one important is watching. Danny Morrison walked into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom as an arrogant millionaire who believed his money placed him above the law. He walked out 6 months later as a changed man who understood that the only success worth having is the kind that lifts others up. That's the true power of justice and the true meaning of redemption.